How I am the best fit for this position. Now, I have ADD and I have ADHD, so I get really nervous and I get fidgety. You may see that I've been messing with my fingers and bouncing my feet. So how do I handle that? Because a lot of people think it's nervous, that I'm nervous and that I'm scared about being in the interview when I'm not. So usually the way to kind of handle that when you have those tics and those nervous energy, if you're sitting at a table like I am now, I usually will put my hands on top of the table and interlock my fingers and just kind of hold them there. So if I do bounce anything, I'm just bouncing and it's not super noticeable. Or it may be my foot where my foot starts bouncing up and down, but I usually will do that where people don't see it. Because you don't want to portray any sort of nervous or you don't want to be unsure of yourself. You want to portray an air of confidence while you're interviewing. So when you're asked a question, you want to make sure that you answer the question that's asked. You don't want to ramble on tangents. That's the worst thing you can do, because if you start going off on tangents and not answering the question correctly or succinctly, people are going to just tune you out. They're not going to listen anymore, and they're going to assume that you're just wasting time. All right, so make sure you listen and understand the question that the interviewer is asking so that you can answer it completely and fully. Please avoid words like a lot. You don't want to say okay, during your interview, because you could be the smartest person in the world, but if you say every other word, you're going to sound unintelligent and unprepared. I had a classmate out of law school who finished in the top 10%. She interviewed with a great law firm in New York City, had the perfect resume for it, perfect opportunity. She didn't get the job because she had the habit of saying about every other word. And because she said every other word, the law firm didn't hire her, because they figured that if she kept saying during any kind of a hearing, disposition, or a trial, it would look like she was unprepared and not as capable and as smart as she is. So, be very mindful of the words you say and the words you don't say. All right, is there any questions at this point anybody have? All right, well, I'm not seeing any. Oh, I lost you guys. Where'd they go? Ah, there we go, we're back. Okay, so after the interview, I think they're good for now. Okay, perfect. So after the initial interview, you want to make sure that you thank everybody for their time. You maintain eye contact, speak slowly, calmly about yourself when you're answering the questions, okay? You don't want to be looking down, because if I'm looking down, I'm talking at the table, you can't really hear, right? So you want to be looking and maintaining eye contact with whoever you're speaking with. That's the best way to handle it. It's the best way to project your confidence and your capabilities. Okay, when I sit in a courtroom and I have to hear a case, if I'm talking to somebody and they're mumbling under their breath or they're talking quietly, to me that portrays an air of intimidation, that they're scared or that they're nervous. And during the interview, that is the first time that you get to really give them a great first impression. And the saying is very true. You cannot have a second opportunity at a first impression. So you always want to make sure you start off the best that you possibly can. Okay. You want to make sure that you portray an air of confidence and assertiveness to an extent. You don't want to come off overbearing. You don't want to come off aggressive, but you do want to be very firm and confident in your capabilities and in your experiences. So after the interview, you want to get up, thank everybody for their time, shake hands when we're not in COVID lockdown where you can't, shake hands anymore. And then you're going to go home and you're going to wait. And that's almost that may be the worst part of the whole process of applying, is waiting to hear back. So I highly recommend reaching out to the point of contacts and just after a couple days to no more than a week, reach out with an email, just reiterating, thank you again for your time. Appreciate the opportunity I had to come and to discuss my capabilities and the opportunity. And then it is okay to ask them if they had any questions for you, any follow-up questions, and or if they have some kind of an idea of a timeline of when you can expect an answer. Sometimes you will have a follow-up interview after that, and it's just a great way to show the company that you truly do appreciate their time. Another point is to make sure when you go in for that interview to research and understand the company that you will be working for, right? You don't want to interview with, let's say, Best Buy and know nothing about Best Buy. You want to make sure that you understand what they sell, who they sell to, their business plan, if you can figure that out, and you want to just understand what you would be doing. So when they ask you questions, well, why do you want to work at Best Buy? You never want to say, because I need the money. I mean, that's not a good answer. They won't like it because that shows them that, one, you're not really committed to the job, and then two, if something else comes around, you're going to bail ship as soon as possible. Okay, so does that make sense? You kind of want to be prepared and understand the company that you're applying to. All right, so in terms of moving forward after the interview, you've sent out your thank you email, you've waited to hear back from them. They got back to you. You've done a second interview on the phone. Well, no, let's roll back. So let's say you reach out and they say, hey, we want to do a second interview with you via telephone. How do you handle a telephone interview? Because that's different, because let's be honest, you're not having that face-to-face interaction. You're not seeing the body language of the people. So it can be a little bit awkward as well. So if you are on a telephone interview, make sure that you're on somewhere where you have good cell reception, right? I mean, I would say make sure that your landline's connected, but honestly, how many people have landlines these days, right? Everybody's got a cell phone, it seems like. So make sure you have good cell reception. Make sure that you can hear them and that they can hear you adequately. When I interview on a telephone interview, I tend to pace around the room, and I tend to move and talk with my arms just because we get in that habit of talking with our hands when we're talking to people face to face. So if that helps you feel calm and relaxed, okay, go ahead and do that if on a telephone interview, but make sure that it doesn't become distracting to you and it doesn't become distracting to them, right? So when you are on a telephone interview, make sure, like I said, that you can hear them, they can hear you, and that you still answer all the questions. Speak very slowly on a telephone interview because we tend to speak quick on telephones just because human nature. So you don't want to speak so fast that they have to keep asking you, hey, sorry, slow down, repeat that. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? Because that can also portray nerves and or non-confidence. And that's not what you want to do. The biggest killer to people is when they portray that they're not confident in their self or their capabilities, or that they portray that they're super nervous. Okay. So that's been kind of my experience with interviewing. I've interviewed at big companies. I've interviewed with small companies, mom and pop shops, to the Air Force, federal government. So, I mean, everything in between, I've interviewed at one point or another. So these are just some of the helpful tips that I had, to kind of come up with how to help you guys out. Now, I know it's difficult to retain all this information since we are kind of in a virtual environment and we're not there to really get to know each other. But at this point, I would like to stress the fact that whenever you go into an interview, make sure that you are calm, make sure that you are confident in your capabilities, and make sure that you put your best foot forward. Okay, if you follow those three steps, those three, tips, you will do fine on any interview. You will be able to present yourself as an articulate, understanding individual who understands the roles and responsibilities that will be required of you in that job role. If you present as a confident person, that's good. Now, there is a difference between being confident and being arrogant. I did get passed over for a job once because the gentleman asked me if I could sell a certain product. And I said, yep, I've been selling, different commercial products since I was 16. I can sell this product. He took that as me being very, very arrogant whereas I was just being confident in my capability. So you do want to make sure that you find that sweet line between being confident and coming off as too arrogant. All right, which FYI on that job, I'm glad I didn't get it. The guy went under business after like 3 months after that interview. So it's all good. Good thing I didn't get the job. So follow those steps, follow those tips. You guys will be fine. And as you interview, it is okay to ask for feedback after the interview, right? So I did mention, after the interview, send that email thanking them for their time. And if you feel like it, you can ask them for their feedback. A lot of interviewers will provide you feedback, what they thought you did well and what they thought you didn't do well. Take that criticism in the light that it's being presented. Typically, the interviewers are not going to just bash you and make you feel bad to make you feel bad. That's not, most people aren't like that. So if you get criticism about what you can improve on, take it to heart and really utilize that and improve yourself so you can interview the next time even better. Okay. So at this point, do we have any questions or comments? I am in a technical room right now, I guess. Tech room. So it's like a conference room, but there's technical stuff around me. Yeah. Yeah, I'm surrounded by giant TVs and whatnot. Okay, so I have a couple different jobs, so I'll tell you about the jobs. We'll start off with the contracting officer. So as a contracting officer, it is my job to negotiate, administer, write contracts for the U.S. Air Force for the acquisition or purchase of airplanes, ammunition, supplies, people. Now, when I say people, I mean services like engineers, technicians to service things. I buy buildings, so commercial services, anything like that. So for example, right now, I'm actually the contracting officer in charge of buying airplanes for foreign militaries. So the United States has partner nations throughout all the world, and I am tasked with buying airplanes to help those foreign nations with their humanitarian aid efforts, anti-terrorism missions, anti-drug running missions, and natural disaster relief missions. So what I do is, for example, Rwanda. Maybe everybody's heard of the African country of Rwanda, but Rwanda came to the United States and said, we want help buying 2 small airplanes so that we can fight terrorism and we can help people out. The United States Air Force comes to me and says, hey, we need you to find and purchase 2 airplanes that meet these criteria. So then I go out to all the airplane manufacturers who make airplanes that fit that criteria, and I ask them who can give me these aircraft in the shortest amount of time with all these modifications. And then I may get 4, 5, 7 bids from all these different companies. I have to evaluate their offers to see which one is the best deal. I then sign that contract and basically purchase the aircraft for Rwanda. And then now I have to work with that contractor to Rwanda in time, in time of the agreement that we had. My internet connection is unstable. Okay, perfect. So another role as a contracting officer is I have to make sure that everything I do is fair and reasonable to the U.S. government, right? Because the U.S. government spends the U.S. tax dollars, U.S. taxpayers' dollars to purchase anything. Okay, so I have to make sure that anything that I purchase is for a fair and reasonable price. I cannot pay for something and spend more money than what it's actually worth, right? I mean, if a airplane is worth $1 million, I can't buy it for $2 million, right? I have to buy it for $1 million. So I have to make sure that what I'm paying for, I pay for a fair and reasonable price. In terms of my job as an attorney, most people know what an attorney does, what a lawyer does. If you ask my dad, I'm a liar, not a lawyer, but whatever. So as an attorney, I take cases and I argue on behalf of my client to get them what they want or what they need. In terms of writing wills and trusts for families, I do that to make sure that the family and the loved ones are protected, that their property after death will be disposed of in the manner that they see fit, and that those who need things can get those taken care of. Working for juveniles, for the juvenile court, I represent and defend juveniles who have been abused, neglected, or dependent upon the state because their parents can't provide for them. I am also a juvenile defense attorney. I get appointed to represent juveniles when they commit a crime, if they can't afford an attorney on their own. So that aspect is very fulfilling, to help out people in when they're in need. So I mean, I help out foreign people by buying airplanes that will save their lives, and I help out local people by representing them when they need legal help. You were really tough. Okay, okay, so what do I like about my job? So what I like about my job is I like that I get to problem solve. I'm faced with a lot of problems almost on a daily basis, and this can be anything from the type of money I have is incorrect, or I don't have enough money, so how do I get more money, to, hey, we wanted an aircraft that does ABC, but now talking to the foreign country or talking to the colonel at the Air Force Academy, we need an airplane that does XYZ. How do we make that match, right? So it's very problematic when your requirements or what people want change. So I love the aspect of problem solving. It's like playing chess. You know, you got to figure out a strategy, figure out what's the best strategy, how to make it work, and then you have to be able to adapt when problems arise. What do I dislike about my job? I dislike about my job is sometimes the processes to get stuff done is overly complicated and redundant. And so it inhibits me or prohibits me from being able to effectively and quickly get my job done. So I am not an active duty military member. I'm a civilian employee of the United States military. So you have three different types of employees when you're talking with the Air Force. You have active duty military, so the guys that wear the uniforms and the fatigues, everybody from the airmen all the way up to the general. Then you have civilians, civilian Air Force employees, me, so people that the Air Force hired directly to do work, right? Because there's not enough active military guys and girls to do everything. So the US Air Force says, hey, we need to employ a civilian service. So I'm a civilian service. And then you have a contractor who, when the Air Force determines that it is more cost beneficial to hire somebody else to do the job rather than hiring a full-time US Air Force civilian to do the job. So I'm not contracted with the Air Force. I am 100% fully employed by the Air Force. I believe the people who work here in the Education Outreach Office are contractors. So basically what has happened is the Air Force has determined that it is better to hire people outside the Air Force who may know how to outreach to different schools and different community services better than somebody like me who they would hire off the street and then have to learn that. So the next question, can you explain the difference between doing your job as an active duty member or as a civilian member? I have worked alongside with active duty military members, most commonly captains, majors, and lieutenants. So really the big difference there is kind of lifestyle, right? When we all come onto base and we sit in our cubes and we're working together, the lieutenants, the captains, and the majors, they're doing the exact same thing I am. They're just reporting to somebody different. They may be reporting to a colonel where I'm reporting to a civilian, right? Now, sometimes I will report to a colonel or a lieutenant colonel as my boss. So the Air Force, the United States Air Force, really intermingles its civilians and its military members to work hand in hand, because together we are all airmen and together we move the Air Force forward to be a better workforce than it is. Can you explain the difference? Okay. Can you write wills for retired military members? I can write wills for just about anybody, since I am a private attorney. So I have not written a will for a retired military member. I have written wills for civilians, U.S. Air Force civilian members. I have written wills for contractors, but nobody with the military, just because the military has its own law office called JAG, and they typically will handle that for the active duty military guys. Okay, so that's a good question. What does the average pay be for a new lawyer in your position without any work history? So we can kind of cover this we can answer this a couple of different ways. So here in the Air Force, the brand new attorney, brand new attorney. Let me back up. I am not an attorney for the Air Force. Okay, I am a private attorney that just happens to be employed to write contracts. Okay, so the Air Force does have its own attorneys who get hired to specifically be Air Force attorneys. When I got out of law school, none of the positions were open, and so I decided I would handle the contractual law instead of the courtroom kind of law that the Air Force actual attorneys do. So the average pay for a brand new attorney in the private sector is not as much as people think. You know, everybody thinks attorneys are making all this money, but that's not until they become senior partners at these law firms. So for a brand new attorney in private practice, you're looking at anywhere between $35,000 to $50,000 starting off. You're also looking at a work week that is at least 50 to 60 hours, if not closer to 70 to 80 hours a week. So I mean, you're working a lot of hours and not getting a whole lot of pay as a brand new attorney. Now, granted, after you put in a couple years, you're going to get bumped up to a huge pay increase and not work those crazy hours. Potentially. Within the government, as a contract specialist is how you start when you go into the contracting field. You come in, if you have a master's with no work history, you come in at about 45 grand. I came in with no work history as a contract specialist with a Juris Doctorate with a JD as an attorney, and I was making about $47,000 a year. So, I mean, that's what you can kind of suspect. If you come into the Air Force without any sort of without any sort of master's degree, just a bachelor's degree, you're probably looking at about $40,000 is roughly where you're going to be at, 35 to 40,000. So that's a good question. The JAG, the question is, you know, you mentioned JAG takes care of the active duty members. Do they also take care of the retired members, or are they required to go elsewhere off base once they have retired? So retired active duty military members can still keep what's called a CAT card that shows that they're retired military. And so they can still have access to the base and still have access to certain base services. So retired military members, depending on their location, may be able to access the legal services. Some can, some don't. It really just depends on the branch. I've had a friend who got out of the Air Force and retired and was still using the legal services. I had a friend who got out of the Army, tried to use their legal services and was told no. So I have not had that experience, obviously, but I've been told that people can. So normally what happens though is those retired military members may just go to a private attorney at that point. I have a question about whether or not there are prisons on the base in case someone gets into trouble. So there are no prisons on base, although some of the buildings may look as dreary as a prison. So what happens if somebody, this is kind of a fun little question. If somebody gets in trouble on base, the base does have its own military police. So let's say something happens and I call 911 on base. The Air Force military police will show up. They will arrest the individual, and I believe they take them to either the oh gosh, I just lost the name. OSI, Office of Special Investigations. They'll take them to their office to see if they're going to be held there, and then they will get them removed to like the county jail, right? So Wright Pat Air Force Base does not have a prison that keeps people in case they get in trouble. Although, some of our basements are pretty gloomy and they may stick them in that to, let them sit and think about what they did. But no, there's no prisons. I have to say that is the first time I have ever been asked if there is a prison at Wright Pat on base. I've been talking with kids a lot about, working on base and things like that. And that's the first time I've been asked the prison question. Which leads me to say, nobody should, hopefully nobody gets in trouble on base. The police, the MPs, and the security forces do not take it kindly when people act up or get into trouble on base. They are not very patient. They are not very forgiving about things. They take it very, very serious, especially if you are active duty military. The active duty military members are expected to live to a higher standard of conduct. So if they start to misbehave, if you will, they get in trouble quite quickly and quite severely. Okay, what happens if someone dies while on active duty on the base? Okay, so if there is a medical situation, 911 is contacted. The local cities, Fairborn and the surrounding neighborhoods, have an understanding with the Air Force that they would respond to those medical emergencies as well. The Air Force base does have its own medical emergency system and team, and they will also assist. Now, let's say there's a car accident and somebody dies on base. It's the same as if somebody died on the road in Fairborn, Beaver Creek, or Dayton, right? The police will shut down the scene. They'll investigate to try to figure out what happened. They'll contact family, and then they'll do their investigation to determine the cause. So it's just the same, except it doesn't impact as many people, or as many people won't be aware of it, because not anybody and everybody can get on base, right? To get on base, you have to have a CAT card or special permission. So that's really the only difference, is that it doesn't impact as many people because there's not as many people on the roadway, or something like that. But I mean, there's no secret, military medical service team or anything like that. It's just like any other city or any other place. So yeah, does the family get their belongings right away, or what is the process? I'm not sure if it's normal, I assume it's normal, the normal process, like a police investigation. So that the family would get notified in a timely manner. But I'm not sure. Those would be questions for probably the OSI officers and the military police, things like that. So this is kind of out of my realm of questions, but I have enjoyed these questions because these are definitely different questions on the presentation, and that always makes it fun for me. What is your most embarrassing interview moment? Okay, so the most embarrassing interview moment I have had, I gotta think about this for a minute, because I've had a lot of interviews over the years. Embarrassing. Well, probably this was an embarrassing situation, but it wasn't embarrassing for me as it was for the guy who was interviewing me. What had happened was I was in an interview for a product support position. So basically a call center, right? So if you're using, let's say, Microsoft, and you're having an issue, software's not working right, you'd call this call center. I would take the call and I would help you get through it. So I was interviewing with this gentleman, and the guy just could not care any less about the interview, right? So I mean, he's got my resume, he's reading it, he's asking me the generic questions, okay, name, experience. His phone keeps going off though, and so every time his phone go off, he'd pick it up and I'd be like, okay, yeah. And so I was beginning to get kind of frustrated with this guy, because I mean, this interview for a job, I need the job. He's obviously not taking it very serious. So somebody came into the room about halfway through, and I thought it was his manager, because the guy who came into the room, the second guy who came into the room, asked the first guy doing the interview, how's it going? And the guy's like, oh, it's going fine. And I spoke up and said, well, it's going fine when he's not on his phone, not paying attention to the interview. And so he got, you know, like, oh crap, I got busted. And the guy who came in, the manager, started yelling at him right then and there about professionalism during an interview. And I was like, this is embarrassing for me because, you know, you guys are totally not professional right now. And this is just super awkward and embarrassing. So when they got done with their, you know, little spat where the second guy was yelling at the first guy, I was just like, yeah, thanks, grabbed my resume and kind of walked out of there and said, all right. So that was pretty embarrassing, but not for me as much as for the other guy who just wasn't doing the interview right. I will say, another embarrassing moment is I tend to sweat a lot being bald. And if I sweat, it's very, very obvious that I'm sweating. And so I was sitting in for a promotional interview at work here, and I was sweating a lot because there were a lot of colonels in the room. And when you're interviewing with colonels and civilian equivalents, it gets very intense. They want to know why you should be promoted, all your experience, and it's a very direct, very intimidating interview. And so I was sweating quite a bit up here on my brow, and this colonel turns to me and goes, son, and hands me a paper towel, goes, wipe your head off. And so I grabbed the paper towel, wiped my head, and, you know, put it in my pocket. And, you know, everybody laughed at that. And so that was kind of embarrassing that this colonel was like, wipe your head off. And, but other than that, you know, that's probably the two most embarrassing moments I've had. Hopefully not to be repeated. What was the most difficult interview you had, or what was the most difficult job you have interviewed for? Okay, so the most difficult interview I had was my first interview here on base, because like I said, it was for a position here on base, and it was with 5 people all at once, right? And so a normal interview, when you're talking maybe one-on-one, and that's fine. This interview, there were 5 people. So I'm sitting here by myself, and they're in a long table in front of me, and there's 5 of them. And they asked me 10 questions. Each person asked me 2 questions. But the way it worked is, first person asked me a question, I would look at them and I'd answer the question. Everybody else is furiously writing down my answer and how I'm how I'm acting, how I'm portraying myself. And as soon as I got done answering that question, the second person would ask the question. And I mean, I didn't have any time to take a breather, to take a break. I mean, it was just boom, 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 right? So, I mean, the interview lasted probably about 30 minutes, but it felt like hours just because it was so intense and just so difficult. Obviously, I did well enough that they gave me a job, though, so that's good. The hardest job that I interviewed for was to be a law clerk for a federal appellate judge in Delaware. So the federal judges have law clerks, and then their law clerks have assistants. So I was basically applying to be the law clerk's assistant during law school. And that's the hardest job I've ever applied for, because you have to jump through so many hoops to get that interview. And then when they finally give you the interview, they call you up and say, is this Mr. Goit? Yes. Hold for the judge, please. And then, I mean, you have no heads up that you're getting this interview. So I was actually in the middle of traffic having this interview with this federal judge about this position that I wanted. And it was really intimidating, and it was so intimidating and so off-putting. I had to pull over onto the side of the road to finish this interview. But I successfully passed that interview and was given the job for summer. All right, looks like you guys are leaving. Thanks so much for time today, for taking us. All right, you guys have a good day. We'll see you guys.